Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Vero, and in today's video we're going to be setting up my April bullet journal theme. My theme this month is a yellow retro vibe and I am super excited. I love how it turned out. As always, I include a flip through of my spreads at the end of the video, so keep watching to see that. This month, the setup is a bit all over the place. I go back and forth between spreads instead of completely finishing one and then moving on to the next, so I hope we don't get lost while watching the video. If you watched my previous plan with me, you'll know that I've recently enjoyed setting up my spreads and painting any decorative pieces on separate cards before sticking them into my journal. I like the idea of being able to bullet journal without having to worry about any painting, so I can just move on with my life and paint when I feel like it. Now, I know you could technically just paint straight into your journal and then leave unfinished pieces and come back when you want to, but I don't like staring at unfinished art in my journal, so I'd much rather stare at a blank square. As I said, my theme is a yellow retro theme, and although the retro part is a very loose term to use, there are some retro elements in there. I'm starting off my spreads with a quote page, and it's the quote, "You are golden," because I am golden, and gold fits with my yellow theme. I've never tried a font other than modern calligraphy in my journal, and it's something I wasn't really interested in, but I've clearly been missing out because honestly, it's a lot of fun. It's also an easy way to make your spreads pretty without too much extra effort like painting something in your journal. I penciled everything in and went with 3 different yellow Crayola super tips to colour the words in. I hesitated outlining the writing in black, but ultimately I think it was the right decision. I also added these little white dot details on the yellow parts, but because of the camera angle and the lighting, you can't see it, so I've skipped this part, but you can see it on Instagram if you click onto my profile. I used the same font for the whole month, and so copied the font for the word April. Now, unlike a lot of other fonts that I usually use, this one was very experimental, and I'm not sure I'd be able to explain the process other than looking at Pinterest and copying the style from specific letters and meshing it all together. Next, I moved on to setting up the calendar for April. Now, somehow I managed to mess it all up by starting the month on a Wednesday, and of course I only realized after writing in all the numbers, which is why there's a whole bunch of clips where I change colors and redo things. And in this video it doesn't look too bad, but in real life it came out kinda bad, kinda weird. So note to self, stop watching Netflix while setting spreads up, it does not help. You'll see I originally did the box a mustard yellow, and on screen again it looks way better. I also went with these little circles for the numbers in my calendar, but because I messed up the days, I decided to go over it in black, and I regretted this decision almost instantly. You can even spot the moment I realized my mistake when I'm flipping back and forth through pages. Luckily, it's not so bad, and I chose not to completely tear out the page and start again. I wrote goals down the bottom with an Archer&Olive acrylograph, and I think it's the primary yellow colour, which is my absolute favourite. I put my goals here, nice and visible, remembering from the previous months that I want it somewhere I could actually see it. And I wrote the numbers of the week and the initials at the top. I lightly outlined the word April and took this opportunity to cut off a small slither of the border that I had previously planned to do. I've decided I want to have smaller subsections in my bullet journal dedicated to each month that are more easily accessible. Now, to understand this, you need to remember that I'm using an A4 journal and that the pages are therefore huge, and it's not easy to quickly flip to a spot. I also rarely use the ribbons to do that either, so my solution was tabs and Dutch doors, which you will see me cut out and explain in more detail later. For now, I'm moving on to my habits trackers. Also, side note, I go back again because I decided to create a black drop shadow for my words after a few hours of contemplation. In March, I included a yoga and Chinese habit tracker, but I didn't do any yoga or learn any Chinese. One of my goals this year, however, is to get back into both of those things, so I need to make time for myself in my schedule for them. How do I do that? I don't know. I think waking up earlier and sleeping earlier could help, but I haven't figured it out. And honestly, I wake up at 5:30 a.m. on some days already, and I can't imagine waking up even earlier. So, I made a video where I got up at 5 a.m. every day for a week, and to date, it's probably my proudest achievement, so definitely go watch that. Linked in the description and in the card here. Another habit tracker I want to include this month is my house chores and self-care. Specifically, I want to have a regular hair wash schedule and know how often I change my sheets, vacuum my room, clean the bathroom, etc. Because honestly, if I don't write it down, I doubt I'll get around to doing it. Ew, I know. I've been loving the rounded borders of any tables and boxes I include in my journal, so for now I'm sticking with them, and using a table like this I'll be able to clearly see what days I do what. It was also at this moment I decided to go back to the cover page and add the black drop shadows I mentioned earlier, because in the end I thought it would look better. I also added the drop shadows for all the other words that I'd let it out so far, and this is just a quick time lapse of me doing that right now. I'm beginning to reconsider my gratitude log. I want to keep the gratitude side, but the one line a day might soon be kept out of my journal. The reason being that I saw a friend using one of those 5 years journals, and I've got to be honest, I think I'm ready to start using one. It hasn't been practical the last years as I've been gallivanting around the world, but as I'm now settled in Australia, I feel like it could be a nice addition to my journaling. I've also cut out the same width strip from the border so that I can move on to setting up my finance tracker. Now throughout all of this, you'll notice that I'm leaving space for future art pieces that I'll be sticking in my journal. And to calculate the space, I figure out where I want the piece to go and then calculate how much space I need for specific logs. For example, I fit my gratitude log on the bottom of the page, so the header needs to be small enough so that the table can fit, including a header for my title. With my finance tracker, I wanted to put the painting on the left side, so I fit the table on the right hand side of the page. Now, if you've been watching my videos for a long time, you'll know that my finance tracker has a date column, an item column, a category column, and a cost column. I also included my master to-do list on the right page, separating it into home tasks, work tasks, and notes. For spacing, I remember to leave the same width sidebar on the border of the page to cut out my Dutch door. Something I've also neglected to mention is that while I'm cutting these Dutch doors, I'm also leaving extra space for my tabs that I'll be cutting out at the end of the video. I've decided to divide my videos into 2 distinct parts so that people don't get bored or can watch only the parts that they want to watch. So from now on, my Plan With Me videos will have the first half where I plan the spreads and the second half where I paint and explain my painting process. I guess it kind of caters to 2 different audiences that may eventually want to try their hand at either of the 2 things, so we'll see. Let me know down in the comments if you like this idea or if you prefer having things in chronological order. For my paintings, I'm measuring out the dimensions of the pieces and taking care to also leave a 1 centimeter border on every side of the page so that I can stick my paper down to my table when I'm painting. In this video, I'll be painting 4 pieces as you can see, and you can skip to the chapters to see each process or continue watching as I do it chronologically. To begin my painting, I start off by sticking it to my desk, and what I'm going to do is use a watercolor pencil to pencil out my sketch, and I'm going to be painting this kind of yellow beetle on a background, and I found these pictures off of Pinterest, so I'm just basically kind of copying them, slightly adapting them and making them slightly easier for me to paint because I can't get into all the details because I don't have the time to do that, and I also am not sure I would be able to either. Now I know my yellow buggy is slightly too big to be a yellow buggy, but I was a bit too lazy to try and edit it and fix it, so it is just going to have to be a yellow car. Because I've already laid down all of my pencil sketches, all I have to do is colour in the car and all the details. For this painting, I'm using 2 sets of watercolors because I don't have black in the Winsor Newton palette, but I do have it in a different palette. It's quite interesting using Winsor Newton and then a different brand of watercolors because I didn't know if I could figure out the difference between Winsor Newton and a different brand, but using them, I actually have noticed a difference, mainly in the drying, because when they're dry, the Winsor Newtons don't have such a chalky, rough feel, but the other ones seem to have one. Now, for the details of my car, I'm really just copying every detail that I see in the image over here on the side and just trying to make it look somewhat realistic. Next, I painted the road, and I'm also doing the shadow of the car, including a shadow of a tree that kind of casts the shadow onto the street. Now I'm moving quite fast in these next process bits because I want to try and get through it as quickly as I can, but I did the sidewalk, including the shadows that are cast from the fence. I painted the door and as well as the fence and all these little details of the sky. Now everything is a very light wash as well because I will be going in later with darker details, and if you've seen any of my previous videos where I use watercolor, you'll know that I always say to start with a lighter color first and then go darker. For the house, the details come in the stripes. I guess you could say it's like a wooden house, I guess, and I just do that by using a darker wash of watercolor. So this is an orange color and I'm drawing stripes across the house. Next, I'm moving on to my greenery, so my trees, and I just use a very light wash of watercolor to lay down the bases because you're going to see me go over these multiple times. So I add details like you saw on that kind of palm tree. I'm doing the first leaves of some of the palm trees in the background, and this actually takes quite a while because you want to get the details, but also you don't need to have too many details because you will be going in darker in just a little bit. Here you'll see that I am going in with a darker watercolor. It's the same watercolor, it just has less water in it to dilute it, and I'm just adding more details. Represents the kind of shadow effect of the tree, and I'm applying that to every single green surface. So I'm darkening certain areas, making the leaves more prominent. The palm trees also help me hide any imperfections in my painting because they're nice and rough edges, and I can just go wild with the leaves and go all over the place. I also draw in some details for my little yellow buggy by doing the car seats on the inside, and this piece is slowly coming together. The last touches that I'll be adding to this painting is to really use a really dark watercolor now, so very minimal water in the watercolor itself to really define any shadows and things like that. I'm also going back with my watercolor pencil to add in any extra details that I couldn't add with my paintbrush. And this is just to show you that, you know, I always mix my techniques or my mediums when I'm doing a painting like this. Especially, I don't think I've ever done a painting like this before either. Then a quick washi tape removal. I'm also cutting off the edges of this painting. And I know some people might be like, oh, well, it's a bit disappointing that you cut off the edges. But in my bullet journal, the edges are basically already there because it's just going to be a nice white background. I'm using these corner scrapbook corner clear sticky bits to stick my painting in. As you can see, they're really practical, and I really enjoy using them, especially when I don't know if I want to keep these paintings in my journal or use them as prints later on. Anyway, let's move on to painting number 2. So painting number 2 is going to be a yellow telephone on a yellow brick wall. So I've just inspired, or I'm copying these 2 images from Pinterest, and I start off by putting a very light yellow wash for my background. Now I'm not putting any of the yellow wash on the telephone just yet because I will be going on the telephone with a darker yellow, so less water in the watercolor again. A quick zoom into the telephone itself. I usually wouldn't start by doing these such fine details. I'd maybe do the actual yellow bit of the telephone, but I think things were still drying, so I didn't want anything to blend together, so I started doing the little keys of the telephone. And I'm trying to add a little 3D dimension, although at this particular angle I don't think you can see that because of the lighting, but if you can, then that's great. Next, I'm doing the telephone itself, and whilst I let that dry, I'm also going in with my shapes and patterns for my yellow brick wall. So the yellow brick wall is pretty straightforward. I'm just doing the cement bits that would hold a brick wall together, making sure to space it out enough so that you can have like a same size brick, but that's not always overlapping each other. I'm now going in to my yellow telephone to finish off the details, and I do things in different orders only because I need the telephone to dry, because I don't want any of the yellow meshing together, especially because this entire painting is just yellow paint. So if some bits are still wet, then the paint will just blend in with the surroundings, and that would just kind of ruin it a little bit. I'm also adding the shadows, so it's a very light wash again, to the outside of the telephone, and I also added some shadows of a palm tree that would be casting on the side. Once I cut off the edges, I add on my corner sticky bits again, and I stick it down into my journal, so in my monthly overview section, like so. And I love how this turned out. Now let's move on to my header paintings for my habit and my gratitude log. I'm just marking the sides that I need to cut off because I don't want to have too much paper to paint and then have to cut everything off afterwards. I stick down the 2 pieces of paper together, making sure I've got the right watercolor side up, stick it down to my table, and then I get started painting. Now with this particular painting, it's really hard to paint anything fully horizontal unless it's like the sky or something. So I decided to break down the painting into 4 or 5 individual mini paintings. And they're all kind of retro, but all have a center color, which is yellow. First one is a yellow alarm clock, which I think is pretty retro. And I put it on a kind of ochre yellow desk. And I also paint in the shadow that the clock would be casting. It's very faint shadow because I just made it really faint. I'm also adding in the little metal details. So here you would actually have a light reflecting from behind the clock. So the shadows that I do are a little bit off on the clock itself, but I tried to add the dimension by using a bit of a black color to, you know, kind of make it a little bit more 3D than it is right now because it's a very 2D painting. I add the numbers to my clock, I draw the clock handles, and I put the time at 6:10-ish. I add in some details and darken some certain spots and move on to my next one. Now this next painting is definitely one of my favorites. It's a Polaroid camera, which is very fitting for the retro theme, and it's a copy of this particular image here from Pinterest in a sunflower field, taking a picture of the sunflowers. So I did the yellow camera first. I did a very light wash of yellow. I painted my background also very light wash because you kind of want it a bit blurry because it is the background of the picture. I'm adding on the details to the Polaroid camera, including writing the Insta Mini something camera, including all the little details that you see on the camera itself. I then go into the actual Polaroid picture and paint more of these little sunflowers before moving on to my next painting. And my next painting is a kind of autumn scape kind of thing, and I've got a person holding a cassette tape, or yeah, I think it's a cassette tape, over a blurry background because I wanted the hand and the tape in focus, but the background to be blurry because it's a representation of this image here. Because I want the tape to be more in depth and detail, I put more details in the tape and the hand so that it stands out on this particular painting to sort of reflect that depth effect of this photo. I'm also using a bit of white gouache paint to put any whites on my page because otherwise you can't really achieve the light look, especially if you forget about it and then paint everything too dark, which is what I did. My next painting is a gramophone. Now this particular painting turned out pretty well in my opinion. I start off by doing the background. I also go back to the first painting because I don't want to leave the background white, and I put a little green wash background. So very basic, but I think it's cute. Now for the gramophone, I'm just going to do the outlines first and then go in progressively with all the details. This time I do remember to leave some of the white of the paper so that it kind of shows the light hitting onto the gramophone, if you could say that. I also darken the spots that need to be darkened. I add in the vinyl on the layer, I guess you could say. I add in the details by putting little oval circular stripes on the disc, and then I darken areas where the shadows need to go. Here I'm also using a little bit of white gouache to emphasize where the light hits because I just really want it to look 3D. And I think it looks pretty good. It's my first time drawing or painting a gramophone and I'm pretty happy with it. My next mini painting is a little telephone, and I'm just painting the background a brown color for a brown table, and I'm doing a light wash before going in with the details for this painting. Now everything is yellow, so I have to make sure everything dries before going and adding in darker shades of yellow for the details. And I add in the dial as well, and I kind of add this little white wash over the top to kind of give it a 3D feel. I'm not sure if it translates well, but how it is. For the background, I decided to do little sunflowers on a wallpaper kind of background. I thought that was kind of retro and it looks nice as well. It differs from the other ones where it's just a solid background. Then I get out my journal and I need to measure how much to cut off of these paintings, and so I actually end up cutting quite a fair bit off, which is a bit disappointing, but I think it looks nice anyway. I use my corner scrapbook stickers to put my painting in, and you'll see that there was quite a little bit of margin at the end, and that reason is because I'm going to be cutting out the tabs, which you can see later on. My next painting is going to be for my finance tracker, and it's going to be a vertical painting, and I've decided to copy this one where you can see flowers casting a shadow on a yellow wall, and I think it looked really cool. So to start off with, I'm going to yellow wash the wall. So I do only one side because the other side is going to be darker because it's where the shadow is being cast from the sun, and I'm assuming that it's probably like a window or something like that. And I just wash all of the background with this color. Then I move on to painting my flowers. So these are little dry flowers. I'm not even sure what they're called. If I find the name, I'll insert it here. And I'm just also doing the 3D effect by putting a shadow behind it. So just moving it slightly up and to the left of the flowers, and only on the light yellow side, because on the dark yellow side or the ochre side is already shadows, so you wouldn't technically see the same shadow anyway. I then add some little white flowers using a white gouache brush, and I'm also going to darken the stems of the flowers because I want it to really pop out from my page. I also go in with a little bit of brown to fill in the flowers. I add another flower because I decided that it wasn't enough flowers, but in any case I think I'm going to cut most of this off because I realized a bit too late that this sidebar is a bit too fat for the page, which is disappointing because when you spend so much time painting and then you had to cut part of it off, it's just annoying. So I should really remember to measure my pages out better. So here I am cutting just the white bits off, and then you'll see me just continue cutting off more bits as I realize that my painting is still too large. Then I stick it in using those corner tabs again, and this is how this finance page looks. My next section of this video is to show you how I cut out my tabs. Now I've measured them out and I have to cut out 4 tabs, and that's why I leave a 5-column gap from the sidebar and then an extra 2 columns for the tabs, the physical tabs themselves. So you can kind of see that on that strip that I just cut out. And then I round the edges of the tabs as well, and the way I figured out how many tabs I needed was how many pages I have in my journal, and then the sizes just rely on how many pages I have. So divide the length of the page by the number of tabs and then figure that out. I also color them in. I just happen to have 4 yellow Crayola Super Tips, so I use those ones in an ombre colors, so from darker to lighter on each of the tabs. I then write out what each tab represents and make sure to do it on both sides of the tab, and that is pretty much all I have to show for today. So let's move on to the flip through. So in my flip through, we have my cover page. So we have the quote, "You are golden," and we have the nice painting. I'm really happy with how this painting turned out. Definitely want to keep working on painting lists like that. My monthly log with the telephone, the habits tracker with the header, which I think looks amazing. We have my finance page. Actually, this page is kind of one of my favorites because of how it turned out. And that's all I'm showing you today. Stay tuned to next week's video where I'm going to be showing you my weekly spreads. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more content like this, you can watch my March plan with me linked right over here.